All right, Hurly-Burly-ites. Today on this two-part pod, I'm geeking out a bit because today we're exploring space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Hurly-Burly. Its 3-year mission to explore strange new politicians, dissect strategy and policy, to call bullshit, and to boldly go where no Canadian political podcast has gone before. First up on the pod is Mike Greenley. Mike is the CEO of MDA Space, Canada's internationally recognized leader in space robotics and sensors, radar, satellites, and ground systems. Pretty much all things space. And that's what we're going to talk about today. What's our role in space? How has it evolved past the Canadarm? How will it continue to grow and impact exploration, defense, intelligence, and Canadian innovation in the economy? And what the hell is going on with all these unidentified flying objects zooming around lately? Are aliens on the doorstep? We'll get into all of that with Mike. And then, second part of the pod is me, Scott Reed, and Jenny Byrne. You know us as the ever-loving, ever-laughing, never safe for small children political panel. Lots to break down today. There's been new developments in the saga of Annamie Paul and the Green Party since our last pod. Among them, Annamie blaming Trudeau for exploiting the situation for his own political advantage. We'll talk about that. There was an Ontario cabinet shuffle last week. 5 ministers were cut outright. Rod Phillips is back. And Marilee Fullerton is now taking care of families with autism because she did such a good job in long-term care. Andrea Horvath just unleashed an attack ad on Stephen Del Duca and the Liberals. Plus, we'll talk about inflation, the Habs a bit, of course, and it's Deaniversary week here in Ontario. We might explain that. And, of course, stick around for our Hey Yous. Mike Greenley, welcome to the Hurly-Burly. Really great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So I start this pod by asking all of my guests, how are you?
How am I? I am well, thank you. It's a very busy time in the journey of Mike Greenley and the journey of MDA. The space economy is booming. We've just gone public in the last 6 months, and so there's a lot of activity as we move forward with the business and into the future. And it's a good time.
Cool. And how are you personally?
Personally, I'm well. I'm enjoying my job. I'm enjoying life. It's kind of a nice feeling, I think, with everybody else these days to be coming back out of a bit of a lockdown mode and be able to get out and about a bit more and sit on a patio. And it looks like maybe even doing a little bit of airplane travel across the border a bit. So that may come up in the next couple of months. So it's good to feel a little bit normal again.
Not with your kids, though.
No, for work.
Yeah. Can't bring kids across the border yet.
No, just for work.
So Mike, all right, this is not the CBC. This is the Hurly-Burly. So before we get into these issues, I've got to figure out who I'm dealing with here. What kind of person am I talking to here? So first question, Star Trek or Star Wars?
More Star Trek than Star Wars.
Brother! So tell me why. Morning. Tell me why.
Tell me why. Oh man, I don't know why. That was just a habit. As I grew up, I watched more Star Trek than Star Wars.
Right.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. And is Jim Kirk one of the greatest men of all time or the greatest man of all time?
I would just have to say one of. I'm sure there's all kinds of
I've been getting ready for this interview and reading up, and I've been watching what was happening with SpaceX a little bit. And before we get into any of it, I just want to get a sense from you as to under what rubric is all of this activity in space happening. So there's all this private sector activity, some of it driven by NASA, some of it not, and various tourism explorations going on, etc. Who governs space right now? Who says who can do what?
There's not really an overall governing body. There are some regulations in terms of anybody who launches something into space needs to get permission from their host country to be able to do that. So if I was launching something into space, then I would get permission from Canada to do so through our regulations. And then if I was launching on a U.S. based rocket, let's say I used a SpaceX rocket out of California, then they would be getting their checks from their permissions from the United States government to be able to do that. So there is local regulation in terms of what you launch, and that is a bit coordinated globally, but there's no overall governing body. So the activity in space right now is kind of analogous to early days 200 years ago on the oceans, before we had the laws of the sea all established.
Well, that's a really interesting comparison, because it's not a really positive comparison. So what role does any host country have to tell somebody that they can set up an international space station or land on the moon? Every individual country can make its own decision. What about when people start claiming territory?
Yeah, so there's been some international activity in terms of that some countries sign up to, in terms of saying that, for example, you can't claim territory on the moon, for example. A number of countries would have signed up to that. In terms of in orbit around the Earth, in low Earth orbit, you need to apply and get licenses for orbital slots, so that your path around the Earth is been applied for and coordinated, so you don't have people launching up into the same spot. There is that coordination that occurs, and so that's kind of like real estate. You've applied for your license for a certain orbit, and you have a certain period of time to which you have to get up there and use that slot, or you'll lose it. So there's a bit of that activity that goes on to coordinate that. But in terms of your question, can anybody from any country, launch a space station or whatever? With the permission of their country, they got to go through all the appropriate, regulations and permits to be able to do that launch and get that orbital slot and assemble something. But we see from a government perspective that the International Space Station's been up for 20 years and it's operating. We see in the last 2 or 3 months, China has started to launch the components of its space station, and now has, just this past week, 3 astronauts on board on their station that they're starting to build and assemble and will develop over the next couple of years. So certainly people can do that, and there are a number of commercial related space station activities where people will have business plans to put up commercial space stations as we go through the next 5 to 6 years.
And tell me what's going to happen on these things. These people that are promising space flights, what is a person going to experience out of that?
From the tourism perspective, the having the best cocktail party stories after you come back, that's probably the best thing. It's like when I was in space. So people will be able to say that. But obviously people get to experience the vastness of Earth, getting up into orbit, looking down at the Earth, experiencing all that, experiencing weightlessness. Some of the tourism activities that are planned are simply to do that, just to go up and have a look and experience floating around and then coming back. Some of them are more dynamic. They involve multiple days going around the Earth several times and getting a much deeper appreciation of being in space. And then some of them are more in the future, more of a private astronaut program where you could get involved in science experiments and other things, and doing activities while you're in space, because you'd be up there for a longer period of time, maybe months. And so you'd be involved in doing tests and experiments as part of being up there.
Okay. So one of the things that really interests me, Mike, is this whole role of the private sector. And obviously you're central to this because you're a private company and you're involved heavily in the space program.
Yeah.
And have been for a while. So maybe this is not a recent thing, and maybe this shouldn't be something that preoccupies me, but I'm an old man. And when I was young, space travel was the purview of governments, primarily 2 governments, the US government and the Soviet government. And everything that happened in space travel through the United States was done by NASA. And now it's really a private sector-led thing. and NASA is sort of a coordinating central funding body that commissions work but doesn't do as much work itself. And I'm wondering, how did this develop, that this went from being a solely public initiative to a largely private initiative? And what do you think the implications of that are, good or bad?
Yeah, I think the way that it developed in terms of the private sector interest in this was obviously entrepreneurship was involved. Some people got, massively motivated, like Elon Musk and the folks at SpaceX, a decade ago, got massively motivated to be able to get into the space business. But a number of people did that. And it became, so there's two things. One is the ambition to go and get it done and invest in it and do it. I think people could see that we could cause a shift. We could cause it to be commercially affordable. And then as that entrepreneurial drive caused it to be more commercially affordable, then more and more people got into it. So we've seen a shift in the cost of launch that's gone from the 1970s to 90s time frame, which would have been about $18,000, $20,000 a kilogram to launch something into space. Now it's at about $3,000 a kilogram, and the launch sector would be targeting $500 a kilogram. So as that entrepreneurship has caused that dramatic decrease in the cost of launch, then more and more people have gotten involved in space. So for the commercial sector, then it's become a legitimate enterprise to engage in because there's legitimate business to be done. And so now, although people don't see it every day, we can travel the world and look at the different continents on Earth and see their economies. There is an entirely additional economy that's in orbit around the Earth and in deeper space that people can now cost affordably, invest in and participate in, and there's a business case to do so. In terms of the implications of that, it's the expansion that we're seeing now. It will just continue to expand. If we look at the, government budgets in space continue to increase dramatically over the last several years. The investment capital that's going into space has doubled in size each year for the last 3 years. So we've gone from like 3 billion to 6 billion or 5 billion to 9 billion, up to, it just keeps going up and up in terms of the investment in private companies, which is causing dozens to hundreds of space-related companies to be created around the world. So the implications of all that is that we've got this legitimate expanding sector that is developing a legitimate expanding economy that today is around $400 billion a year in size and is forecasted in the 2030s to be in about the 1.5 trillion or more in size. So it's a tremendous growth that's coming as a result of this.
And so you were an early part of this, right? You were a supplier to NASA?
Yeah, MDA has been involved in space for about 52 years. So it's really interesting when you spoke and you said that, your memories of activities in space, it was all about governments. And you said the United States and the USSR, which is true. They were the first two countries in space. The third country in space was Canada. But we're not used to knowing that and being aware of that like Canada was the third country in space. I didn't even know that until I researched. I didn't even know that, Mike, until I was researching for this interview, that we were the third country to launch something into space. Yeah, and so we got into that, for the reasons why, you think Canada would. We're a vast country. We need communications across our country. And so Canada got into the communications game early in terms of looking at how satellites could be used to provide communications across a vast territory, and then over time into Earth observation in terms of how do you keep track of all the activity around the borders of a place the size of Canada, keep track of ice in the Arctic and ice in the shipping lanes and maritime domains and all the natural resources that you want to keep track of across the country. Space is a very effective tool at looking down at the Earth and being able to maintain that awareness. So so Canada was right in there from the get-go.
One of the things I was reading about about the role of the private sector is risk tolerance. And does that imply that when you're doing these things, there's a lot of failure before there's success, and that NASA couldn't afford failures? The private sector could.
Yeah, I think that all of that type of pushing the limits and having failures and the failures that come with innovation cycles that you typically celebrate. I tried something, it didn't work, but I learned something. Doing that in a positive, progressive manner taking measured risks, obviously, not messing with human risk, but technological risk. We've seen that, and we've seen, for example, in the launch cycles of a SpaceX or what have you, that the advancements that they've made in terms of rocketry, and the return of boosters, to have reusable boosters and the like. A lot of people thought that couldn't be done, but they just kept pushing it and trying and figuring it out, and they solved it. I think that the private sector is able to innovate in that way much more rapidly and freely than government. If the posture was, NASA created a rocket and they launched it and it blew up, it'd be like, oh my God, the government has failed. And you see it now on social media. SpaceX will put a rocket and it blows up. Everyone's clapping and cheering and saying, oh my gosh, that was a great test and we learned all these things. You just wouldn't get the same reaction. In one case, it's somebody like innovating and pushing the limits of Earth. In the other case, it's the government screwing up again. So I think that, industry's engagement in this stuff, has absolutely enabled the innovation cycle to be able to crank. The visible stuff is the stuff that we see in terms of, the rocket type stuff, like the rocket innovations. It's high profile, it's very visible. But of course, there's a lot of other innovation going on that we're all involved in around next generation Earth observation technology, next generation communications technology. How do we get information back from space? And all those innovation cycles and failures and successes are happening in the labs of all of our various companies, and not quite as visible as rockets blowing up. But everybody's leaning into it in the same way in terms of making those advances. And so we're definitely seeing with the increase in government spend, with the increase in capital investment in the sector, the innovation cycle is definitely accelerating.
Let me give you a short hurly-burly primer on the difference between spending and investing. Spending is when it's 2015 and you buy a leaf blower to finally clean up your property, and now it's 2021 and that leaf blower is in perfect condition because it's never been used. Investing is when it's time to buy your first CD in 1983, and after careful consideration, it turns out to be Duran Duran's Seven and the Ragged Tiger. And it's still paying dividends because even though New Moon on Monday makes your ears bleed, you're still talking about it on your podcast almost 30 years later. That's a good return. Our presenting sponsor, TELUS, has been investing in improving digital connectivity for Canadians since the year 2000. Nearly $240 billion nationally in network infrastructure, operations, and spectrum. And now they've just announced an additional $54 billion investment through the end of 2024. The impacts of that are going to be significant for our post-COVID economic recovery. 529 new urban and rural communities will have TELUS blazing fast 5G network by the end of this year. 1 million more homes and businesses will be connected to their pure fiber high-speed internet. That'll push the total to over 3.5 million premises. Right across the country, these kinds of investments are going to do more than expand network coverage and speed. They'll create over 38,000 new jobs in construction, engineering, and emerging technologies. In the coming weeks, we're going to take an audio road trip and break it all down, province by province. And we'll go underneath the numbers to share some stories about how the lives of Canadians are changing for the better when it comes to how we learn, run our businesses, and take care of our health. For now, you can go to telus.com/connectingcanada to learn more. All right, so let's take a minute with that innovation cycle accelerating and get us excited about space. And I'll just throw myself on the mercy of the court. And I will say that I kind of lost interest in it a number of years ago when I read and came to understand, maybe I'm wrong, that we can't go anywhere. That we can't even envision speeds that would get us anywhere in the universe. So other people obviously think differently, and obviously other people are putting a lot of money behind being more optimistic than that. So what's exciting? What's possible for us?
Yeah, so I think that the things that are possible in space are in different categories. So you picked space. I'll call it space exploration or space travel, and I'll go there. I'll go there last. I'll save that for the big finish. But in terms of other things, in terms of that are exciting about space that affect our lives every day, like humans on Earth are using all of their devices these days. And we want the world to have, global connectivity. The United Nations declared a bunch of years ago that access to the internet is a basic human right. Canada has declared that everyone in Canada will have high-speed internet connections by 2030. And so this is exciting. To me, this is exciting because ubiquitous communications and high-speed communications, no matter where you live on the earth, means that everybody has equal access to a good education. Everybody has equal access to starting a business, putting a business online, being an entrepreneur. And it doesn't matter if you're in New Mexico or Nunavut or anywhere else, you've got that same access. So I think that's going to be a tremendous impact on Earth. So what's going to enable that and enable that at speed is going to be space. We're increasingly putting up broadband networks in orbit over the next several years to be able to bring that high-speed communications to the world, which will absolutely change the dynamics and be an equalizer all around the Earth. A second thing would be Earth observation. We increasingly put up different sensors for Earth observation in monitoring things like climate change, for example. There's about 50 variables that people need to monitor for climate change. 26 of those can only be monitored from space. And so our ability to put up sensors...
Do you think it's happening?
What happening?
Do you think it's happening? Climate change?
I think climate change is happening. Personally, I personally believe climate change is happening. That's a different interview, but I do.
No, I'm talking to somebody who's talking about observing it from space, and I was just being funny about people that,
no, absolutely. I personally do. I believe that. So things like our ability to have satellites up there, then observe climate change, measure it, manage it. In addition to everything else, we're going to get to a position where for some people, it's a scary thing because they're concerned about demand and stuff. But like companies and countries will be able to, in a while, persistently observe the Earth. And so that means you can have persistent change detection, whereby when something changes, you can quickly detect it using, various forms of algorithms to detect that. And so our ability to monitor things and analyze things around the Earth will be greatly enhanced, which will have a huge economic impact around the world. And so I think in addition to a great environmental and quality of life impact. So managed well, I think that's exciting. I think that space tourism, if we go there next, will dramatically continue to increase. That's an exciting thing that's going on into space. People will be able to, like we talked about it earlier, leave Earth, go into space, engage with it. We have to manage that well and make sure that it's done safely and the like. But all that kind of activity is inspiring for people. Like people get excited about that people are going into space. And then the government activities to go to the moon and to Mars and to the moons around Mars, as we go through the next 20 years, will really get people's imagination, I think. As we go through the 2020s, in the 24 to 26 period of time, humans will return to the moon. This time when we return to the moon, we're not going to visit. We're going to stay. The community will build habitats or bases on the moon. We will grow food there. We will mine resources there, create fuel there. We'll have a new space station called Lunar Gateway that will orbit the moon and support activities on the moon. And we see through the program that NASA leads called Artemis, more and more countries signing up to be involved in this. And then parallel activities. We see China and Russia have signed an agreement to build a base together on the moon. So we're going to have, a number of countries by the time we get to 2030 that have, started the process of inhabiting the moon. And communication networks will be established there, everything, which will then send us in the 2030s on to looking at Mars, go looking at the moons of Mars. And then, eventually the plan would be, of course, to get, humans on Mars and take all the lessons from the moon and then have habitats out on Mars. All that activity causes a number of effects. It pushes a lot of technology and technology developments that can be a benefit on Earth. It causes humanity to become an interplanetary species. That looks like that will occur. And then that's really interesting. And then all of that dramatically inspires youth. So the activities of astronauts and space exploration catches the imagination, motivates the youth to participate in science and technology and engineering and math, and be able to advance, science and technology and want to be involved in that. It's unbelievable how many people we interview to work for MDA. There's these two types of people, and you see them in interviews all the time. And there's a type of person that's looking for a good job, and they're here to have an interview and use their skills and have a good job. And then there's these other people, and it's in their eyes. It goes, since I was born, since I was 6, since I was 4, I learned about space. I dreamed about space. I always wanted to be an astronaut as a kid, and I want to do things. All my life, I wanted to do things in space. That feeling, that pulse, that like driving these people to explore, what they can do with their minds and what they can build and advance in society, like it's amazing to see, and it's only going to increase the more that we, live in these other, start to inhabit these other planets.
Wow. Okay.
There's
that is exciting. Can I just ask you?
There's a couple other side effects that I didn't mention that will come. 2 more I should mention. Sorry. One is on-orbit manufacturing. There's a growing business to come in on-orbit manufacturing to be able to use sensors and robotics and spacecraft to assemble things in space. That'll allow us to build different types of satellites, but also different structures. And then there's a world that's being discussed in the sector of space mining. There's about 17,000 asteroids that are reachable from Earth that have a wide range of different, minerals and ore and the like in them. And as we, advance into the future, and there could be some minerals that we run out of on Earth and or choose not to mine Earth to its full extent, there will be opportunity to be able to do asteroid mining and have that support humanity as well. And so that's going to be that's a few years out, but people are really starting to work on that now, which has an economic benefit, but also an Earth preservation benefit.
Are you expecting that environmental assessments are going to be less onerous on the moon?
Potentially.
Can I ask you just a quick sidebar about trips to the moon?
Yeah.
There aren't many things that we could do in the 1960s that we cannot do today. And how did flying people to the moon become something we can't do? I would have thought we'd be doing on a regular basis. Why isn't it? Normally, technological things that were difficult in the 60s are routine today. How did that go the reverse?
Yeah, and a number of people thought that once we started doing that you would keep doing it, right? And we took a very significant break as society there in that regard. So I think, I think it comes back to the original sort of reason why. So the reason, why did we go to the moon in the 60s? We went to the moon in the 60s the Americans went to the moon in the 60s, so that they could do it before the Russians. There was a mini space race that was going on. And so the race occurred, there was winners and losers in the race, and it was conducted. And then you kind of ran out of reasons at the moment, and you get back to life and you've got, other economic activities, and you've got, government risk, like we talked about earlier. And then that, diminished and slowed things down. Space continued in the background. It's a highly innovative, collaborative international community. Certainly the International Space Station was essential and critical. The whole generation of space shuttle and space station were critical to keep everything going. But now we're seeing that, there's new reasons. There is still a bit of a space race going on. A number of countries want to get to space, but people are realizing the impact of space on life on Earth. People are realizing the impact of space on the economy, that it's a great economic engine. Very high quality types of jobs are created in space that pushes technology and drives, a solid space technology sector in any country. A lot of countries want that. Now we have 90 countries, 90, that have a space association and want to get involved in activities in space. So there's a much larger drive now to be involved for more reasons than just to say that I did. So the economic reasons and the expansion of humanity to other planet reasons, really drive it in a way now that it has a chance to be persistent. And you see from the investment and returns coming from industry that there are, legitimate commercial reasons now to participate in space. Well, we'll keep it going. I realized I didn't answer one of your questions earlier because you asked about, the speed of moving around space. And that is another one of the innovations that, has a high probability of coming. There are a number of groups that are looking at different types of propulsion systems, including, nuclear-based propulsion for spacecraft that would, dramatically change our travel over the next couple of decades. And so our ability to, get to the moon in sub a day, or to get to Mars maybe in 30 days instead of 9 months, which would be 9 months. And like with nuclear propulsion in a spacecraft, it would be sub 30 days. So there are definitely whole groups of people that are looking at that, which will, definitely over the next 20 years have the potential to change our ability to bop and zip around between these planets in ways that we can't do today. And obviously, that type of activity will progress the next level of activity in terms of speed and how far you can go and how fast. So that there's a whole strain of innovation, commercially led, in that regard as well.
Hey, well, thanks for that. That's actually kind of encouraging on that front.
Yeah.
Let's talk about MDA for a little bit.
Sure.
So there is not much more that is iconic in Canada. So I have friends who hate the word iconic. They'll be all over me. But there's not much more iconic in Canada than the Canadarm and the image of the Canadarm in space. And that was invented by MDA back in the 80s.
Yep.
Right? And now you've been commissioned by NASA to do the third iteration of the Canadarm for this Lunar Gateway project. Yep. In the time since you invented the Canadarm, Palm Pilots have come and gone, Nokia has come and gone, BlackBerry has come and gone. How are you still the leaders in this robotics area after all this time? The experience that we have. So like the knowledge that we have and the experience that we have. So Canada made a strategic decision. So back at the space shuttle days, Canada made the decision that it was going to provide, in its collaboration with other nations, it was going to provide the innovation that was going to drive robotics for the space shuttle, and then really stepped on the gas and accelerated that into the Canadarm2 for the space station. And so that's obviously a very strategic decision that worked out extremely well. So we got that role. We did that innovation. All that technology has worked extraordinarily well. And the hundreds of people and hundreds of companies in our supply chain that are involved in these things, have all that experience now in the country. And so when you go to do it next, there's a phrase people use that is space is hard. So it is hard. And so we've got that experience and we've cracked that nut. And so when you go to do it again, geopolitically, Canada has the brand of being space robotics now. So when the Canadian Space Agency is negotiating with other countries for our role on programs, certainly robotic-based technologies, we have incredible credibility to say, well, of course, Canada will do the robotics. In addition, because space is hard, you want the proven technology. So we made the commitment, we developed the technology, and it's worked for over 20, 30 years. And so when you want to do it again, and let's say this new space station, Lunar Gateway, the current space station is 400 kilometers from Earth. Lunar Gateway is going to be 400,000 kilometers from Earth out at the moon. So when robotics need to work out there, you go with the people that know how to do it, that they're proven that it's going to work. And so you've got that past performance, and that holds us. Space is a different environment in terms of the robotics. It's interesting because these robotic instruments look very large, like big crane-like arm-like objects, which is the Canadarm, but they have tremendous dexterity. So like our ability to sense and grasp with very fine levels of precision is extraordinary in terms of what we've done. And so it's the robotics themselves to be able to last in space, and then the control systems that have been established and refined year over year for the last 30 years, have continued to improve every year of operations. We've probably sent something to the space station or received something back from it, almost every year for the last 20 years. So we're constantly upgrading, changing, improving, modifying software. The robotics on the International Space Station has increasingly got smarter and more autonomous on our way to the Lunar Gateway. So, just because we delivered something 20 years ago never means we're done. Our staff this team we have today has over 3 million hours of experience supporting, planning and supporting robotic operations on the International Space Station. And so that's continued innovation over the last 20 years, which keeps us ahead. And then that reputation gets you the next job. Okay. And what else do you do besides the Canadarm?
Yeah, so we have three strong business areas, world leaders in each one in MDA. So one area is geointelligence. So we own and operate RadarSat-2, a radar-based satellite, a world-leading capability that looks down and observes the Earth every day. And we sell that.
To see what? To see what? To see what, Mike?
To see whatever people want to see. So in terms of areas where our radar satellite image would be used, it would be used for environmental reasons, to look at ice in the Arctic, icebergs, ice flows all around the north. It would be used to track ships and various forms of transportation, ships on the ocean. We use it for analyzing forests, to do deforestation analysis. Our shipping data is fused with shipping detection data, is fused with other sensors. We have a huge program right now that's out for trials in partnership with Canada, monitoring the fishing zones around island nations so that they can detect illegal fishing and be able to then, intersect and deal with illegal fishing. A wide range of natural disasters, we use radar-based satellite for. Radar is an active sensor, so it doesn't just look, it pings. So from 800 kilometers up, we're pinging the Earth and getting a return. As a result, we can measure elevation. And so there's a whole range of activities in the natural resources sector and the infrastructure sector where people would like imagery to know if the various heights of land have changed for different types of analysis that they do. We can deliver reports of the height of oil in all the oil tanks in the world. Some people would care about that. If you're doing economic analysis, how much oil is being held in all the oil tanks in the world, you can measure that from space. So there's a wide range of different imagery and analysis across economic, security, transportation, and climate and environment sectors that people would buy that imagery for. So that's what geointelligence is all about. And so we have that business where we're processing information from our sensors and other people's sensors to deliver imagery and analysis to government customers and commercial customers around the world. We've recently announced a large investment. We're in the development now of our next generation of Earth observation satellites that we're going to put up in the next several years. And that's what's happening in geointelligence. In satellite systems, our other business area, which is largely driven out of Montreal, we produce technologies for satellites and build full satellites. And so the satellites that are used for Earth observation and certainly the satellites used for communication, we provide a wide range of technology for all different aspects of communication satellites and are involved in exciting new projects like the Canadian-based Telesat Lightspeed project, which is going to be one of the most technologically advanced low Earth orbit communication constellations. And we'll have a significant role on that, developing digital technologies for that and being involved in the manufacturing of hundreds of satellites here in Canada that will build that constellation. So that's a very growing area of the global market, which is what we talked about earlier, is that broadband communications connecting the world. And then in robotics and space operations, it's all about what we've been talking about in the Canadarm, is putting the robotics up, increasingly having space operations. Here in Canada, we didn't mention, but this Canadarm3, which will be the new robotics on Lunar Gateway, this new space station by the moon, it'll be operated from Canada. So Canadarm2 that we delivered into NASA for the space station is operated from Houston with Canada as a backup site. Canadarm3 on the new Lunar Gateway out at the moon will be operated from Canada, so no Houston. So it'll be Canada, we have a problem, and the next generation of operations. And so that's really, really exciting and gets us to use all of our operational experience on the next generation. And those same groups develop rovers. So we've had technology on rovers on Mars for the last dozen years, 12, 14 years. More technology going up all the time. Another rover going up to Mars from Europe, potentially next year, that we built all the mobility and propulsion systems and vision systems for, and many more to come. Canada's just announced a new micro rover program that they're going to run competitions for over the next year or two. And so that whole rover technology area is another growing area for the robotics group as well. Pretty exciting. We get to do a lot of stuff. We get to work
all across
the space sector. All across the space sector.
That is all pretty cool stuff. All right, now can I ask you to take a step back and talk to me a little bit about policy in Canada as it relates
Yep.
to your industry and more broadly. So, people who worry about such things have for a long time worried about Canada's record of innovation. And the closer we get to a transformation from an old economy to a different economy, the more these people worry about these things.
Yeah.
And to the extent that, I had economists on this show that were critical of the last federal budget, it was about maybe they didn't see a growth strategy. Maybe they didn't see the ideas in there that were going to propel the economy forward into this next generation. I'm interested that you had been purchased by an American company, MDA, not you personally, Mike, but MDA had been purchased by an American company and then has been repatriated by a Canadian consortium of investors.
Yes.
Among that consortium of investors is Jim Balsillie, who has very, very strong views about Canadian innovation policy.
Yes.
And I'm wondering whether MDA has a purpose now, whether this consortium and this new ownership want MDA to fulfill some national function here in Canada. And second of all, you're right at the core of innovation and doing it well and doing it internationally competitively. And so what's that secret sauce and how can we get it into our manufacturing sector?
Yeah. So I think in terms of like MDA's purpose, so I think that there is a purpose behind what has just occurred. I think that the board, the investors, myself as a leader, like we're all very proud of what has occurred here, and that when it was decided by our historical parent in the United States to put us up for sale, that the way that process finished was this group of very passionate Canadian investors, purchasing MDA, returning us to a Canadian headquartered based company, and then taking us public in the last year on the Toronto Stock Exchange. So that's been really exciting, really proud. We do use the word national champion in our language. We believe in that. We believe that we have a role to be the large space company, Canadian based. We're a global space company, but we're based in Canada, and we're very proud of that. And the fact that we get to engage a broad supply chain across the country to be able to do that is exciting and a serious responsibility that we take seriously. So that is definitely a thing with us. In terms of innovation and what makes it work and the drive, I think that, and then your government comments on government policy. And I've been involved in a number of different panels and stuff around this thing and different groups supporting government. And we regularly get back to the conversation around making decisions. I mentioned that, we are world leaders in space robotics because Canada made a strategic decision back in the 70s, that we were going to do the robotics. We are a successful space company because Canada made a strategic decision 50 years ago that they were going to be the third country into space and put up space-based satellites and communication-based satellites. And my Montreal business, which goes back 60 years, has been with that every single day ever since. So those were government decisions where they made choices. They picked areas that we were going to enter and be awesome at. Frustration comes often when, quote unquote fairness, it comes into it, where Canada has always had a bit of a challenge. The phrase always being picking winners and losers. The government can't pick winners and losers, but the government does need to pick strategic areas where, we do have a chance to be able to go and lead the world and get behind it. When the government gets behind something in a vein of technology or the economy, then they can be the anchor customer for that. They can fund and take us through the high risk phase that lets industry then gain momentum around that and start to bring industrial investment to that equation. When you look at space, and we've talked earlier about maybe commercial getting a bit ahead of government. Maybe, but government's right there all the time in the back alley. So if you look at a company like SpaceX, it has a very, very public view that it's out there and SpaceX is investing and it's causing all this activity. It's true, but they've had billions of dollars of government contracts as well. They have an anchor customer in the government to be able to, get a lot of rocket launches and get up into NASA and stuff. And then now the conversation is about the Starship and the transportation to the moon. So the government being there saying that, like, if you invest in this, I'm going to buy it, or I'm going to be your anchor customer to get you through the first phase, and I'm deciding this is something that I want to do, fuels industry. It gives industry that base to stand on, to be able to make stack up investments on that. So I think that having programs and activity where we decide what we want to do, we get government anchor support for doing that, and then maybe programs where there's some collaborative industrial government activity, and then industry will take over. If you look at something like Earth observation, we've had a history of getting contracts to build radar-based satellites from the government, and now we've committed to the largest investment in our history to put up our next generation of Earth observation capability. And we'll look to governments to be anchor customers of that, but we're not waiting for them this time. We're moving out and doing it, and then because we've got that confidence, and that's been built up over time, just like SpaceX. So that relationship is important. Yeah.
Okay, so you're describing something interesting. Now, I got a friend named Robert Aslan who writes a lot about innovation and competitiveness issues, and he was recommending prior to the last budget that Canada create something like the US's DARPA program.
Right.
Not the Dharma project, that's lost, but the DARPA program, which has done, as I understand it, in a very superficial way, exactly what you're talking about, which has got together with industry and academia over the years and said, we need to be able to do this. Let's put some money and get our resources together and go figure out how to do this. We need to know how to make Tang so astronauts can drink orange juice in space, that kind of thing. And And when your U.S. parent first moved you to the States, it was partly to access that kind of money, wasn't it? So what ought Canada to be doing similarly to that?
That type of a program is a perfectly good idea. Like, I've been in a number of discussions which would be, related to what if Canada had a DARPA-like program. And that type of a program, it makes perfect sense to be able to pick the areas where you want to go, to get that partnership between government and industry, take the high risk part of the curve and do it together, or do it with initial government support. Or sometimes DARPA will run competitions. They'll say, here's the problem I want to solve, and maybe give some funds to a couple of people to try to solve it. And there's been any number of companies that have continued with their maturation and got to the level whereby they became a legitimate startup and started getting venture capital and going on, but they never actually got the government job. But they broke the back of their innovation cycle and technology development on a DARPA-like project or an innovation competition of some kind. And so that makes sense. And making those picks is a thing. I have every meeting I've been in. The hardest thing is for Canada to make picks. Yeah.
Okay, but what are you going to say back, Mike, to your colleagues in the business community who've been saying for 40 years, they've been saying it so consistently and successfully that one of the leading economists in Canada, Frances Donald, who's in her 30s, didn't know what industrial strategy was, had never heard of it. That's how driven out of Canadian discourse this has become. So what would you say back to business people who have consistently said government's too dumb, too slow, too corrupted by special interests to make these decisions?
We need to find a way of making those decisions then. Maybe we need to have, some sort of forum whereby, industry can work with government to help them make those decisions and put the business cases on the table for the different picks that need to be made. I realize that opens the word you used a second ago of special interest, but there still needs to be that engagement to be able to become educated and informed about what the opportunity is. So maybe in a DARPA-like environment, there needs to be a front end of that where industry can educate and inform government, saying, like, if you put money here, this is what we can cause. That's just in real time thought. Maybe that needs to be done, but it doesn't change the fact that it needs to be done. We just have to figure out how to do it.
Okay, and so your view is that the public sector, that government has a real role in spurring on innovation in our economy.
I believe so. Yeah, I believe so. In addition to, in my sector, engaging in technology development for sure and pushing innovation, but then also creating, financial structures that encourage industry to do innovation. If you look at, whatever financial incentives that one would want to think about in terms of, having access to structures and funds that can encourage people to do research and development, that maybe give them appropriate tax breaks and the rest to do that, or have programs where you can access funding with the right business case to be able to do so. So in both of those ways, I think that's relevant. We've seen as a nation, like a lot of that stuff decline over time. If we go back, through government, supported funds, if you go back 30 years, it was much more accessible in terms of your ability to get, funding for initiatives to take something new on than it is today. It continues to, like everything else in our helicopter society, it gets more and more scrutiny, year over year, and gets more and more conservative year over year. And so therefore it gets less effective year over year.
What you're talking about, some kind of strategy, it just seems to me like a no-brainer. Like for our previous years of existence, what we were going to sell to the rest of the world to make ourselves prosperous was obvious. It was sitting around us in terms of natural resources, trees, oil, minerals. This is what we did. Now that those are no longer going to be our competitive advantages, they're not obvious. We have to make them up, don't we? We have to look around the world and say, what can we do that nobody else can do as well as us?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
That is a strategy. That is a strategy.
That is a strategy, and that is something we need to pay attention to and where we have roots. If you take something like we just talked about, space-based communications, like we made a strategic decision 50 years ago to enter space-based communications. We have a whole communications infrastructure in the country. We went through the days of the Nortels and the JDS Uniphases and the like that were in the country. We have a strong technology sector in the realm of communication. We're about to go back through an economic wave of global communication enhancement through space. So that I just pick an example that I'm familiar with because we're in this conversation, but that's a legitimate, it's in the DNA of the country. We have an academic base, a startup base, experienced engineer base around communications, and we can go and make something out of that. But you'd put that on the table as one of the places where you can go and where you can grow into the future and rally around that.
Okay, Mike, we're almost out of time. This has been such a fascinating conversation, but I'm not going to let you go. I'm not going to let you off the hook without really breaking the news to us. And I've got you here, and I know the government reports officially are supposed to be coming out in the near future. But what do you know about these aliens? What's flying around out there? Surely to God, something has found us. What are they? What's going on? Give us the straight goods.
Unfortunately, I have no insider information on that regard compared to anybody else. I do personally believe that if you look at the size of the galaxy and everything that's going on, it's certainly possible, but I do not have any insider information. No reports have been slipped to me, so I'll have to wait for the news like everybody else.
I don't believe you. This is a cabal, right? You've been to Roswell, haven't you?
No,
You've been to Roswell.
There's no inside club. There's no inside club.
All right. Mike, thank you so much for this conversation. And I hope you continue to be, first of all, best of luck with everything you're doing, but particularly with the Canadarm, obviously. And, please stay involved in Canadian economic policy and helping advise the government because you're right on the cusp of where we're needing to go.
Yeah, we want to do that. It's really important. Thanks very much for the time today.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.
So, our sponsor, CN, is replacing itself. Literally. It's becoming a new railroad, piece by piece. It's a long-term project, to put it mildly. Actually, it's sort of endless. You see, steel rails wear out, eventually. So do ties, the big posts of wood rails are bolted onto. They bear the weight of millions of tons of machinery, year in, year out, in heat waves and deep freezes. Now, rails are a lot more durable than they used to be, considerably tougher than the earliest rails, which were made of wood. I did not know that. Rails are much longer nowadays, which means fewer joints, which means a smoother ride, and they're made of super high quality hot rolled steel. But like I said, they still wear out. So CN replaces hundreds of kilometers of rail a year and hundreds of thousands of railroad ties. CN is meticulous about it. Finished ties must be laid a certain way and cannot be handled with tools. Rails must be unloaded by cranes, cannot be dropped, and must never be struck by a hammer or any other tool. And it costs money, a lot of money. CN will be spending about $3 billion this year replacing rails, ties, and a lot of other infrastructure. That includes rebuilding road crossings across Canada, fixing up bridges and signal systems, and even culverts. That in turn means jobs, community partnerships, hundreds of millions of dollars in local spending, and tens of millions in taxes paid to various jurisdictions along CN's network. It's about moving more of the Canadian economy by rail, which in turn leads to reduced greenhouse gas emissions, trains being much greener than trucks. But it's mostly about safety. At CN, safety trumps everything. CN is serious about running the safest railroad in North America. It is Tuesday morning, and that can only mean one thing. That means I'm with Jenny Byrne, and somehow Scott Reed forced his way in. So, hello, both of you.
Hello.
Hello. How are we
Tense.
feeling? Verge of Game 5, how are we feeling?
I'm a little bit nervous. I don't know. I think maybe I got nervous watching last night's game. My God, the poor Islanders fans. The poor Islanders.
I'm way nervous. Game 4 was a heartbreaker. I just hope it isn't a backbreaker. I really am anxious about whether the team will sort of take a bit of an emotional beat from it. But, they've surprised. Every time here's the good thing. Every time I felt down and pessimistic and hope is lost, these guys contradict me. Every time I start to feel like, wow, we're really cooking, I think we're going to win this thing, then we lose. So I'm in the, my bizarro world luck hopefully should work for us tonight then, because I'm feeling very, very anxious.
I think that, Jenny's been more steadfast with them than you and I have. But I think, you and I, they need to believe in themselves more than you and I believe in them. That is for sure. Otherwise, they won't win. I think the problem is that we all think it's kind of a Cinderella thing, right? We don't think it's real. So anytime something like last game happens, you go, holy shit, the good luck streak is broken.
Well,
and now they're in trouble.
Will there be a new reffing team? There must be, because they're over in the States. I normally don't like to complain about reffing, but the last two games have been horrid.
More coming on that.
Well, the guy.
I'll come back to that topic later.
Will you?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's talk a little bit of politics. Activity in Ontario this week that signaled that we are getting into the election season, even if it's only a year away. Ford shuffled his cabinet. And often people think this is a wise political thing to do. But we can debate here how much impact positively cabinet shuffles actually have. But this one was... It's hard for me to see what impact this was going to have on public opinion about the government. It seemed to be more of a shuffle that solved internal problems in the government than it did to address external perceptual problems. But maybe I'm wrong. Jenny, what's your take?
Yeah, listen, I'm kind of with you. I think that some insiders and a lot of politicians think cabinet shuffles can make or break election campaigns. And I don't think there has never been a case in my lifetime that I've worked on a campaign where someone being a minister has saved them from losing their seat in the next election. It just isn't the case. Most people don't know who most of the cabinet are. I hate to tell it to people, but that's the case. I think maybe, under the correction government, when your guy was finance minister, he had an extremely high profile but that is rare. It doesn't normally happen. And so it obviously, I think this cabinet shuffle fixed some internal problems, probably that the Ford government has. I think it might have caused some others, although I've been surprised at kind of the lack of chitter chatter, for lack of a term, that it's actually caused. It kind of just went, like, it happened. It was a story for a few hours, and now kind of life has gone on.
What would have been the internal challenge? What would have been the internal issues they were trying to solve with this shuffle?
Well, there hasn't been a massive shuffle. There was a small shuffle in the fall of 2018 when a cabinet minister had to be replaced. Then in June of 2019, there was a larger shuffle, but it didn't affect everyone. This was the first time there's been a massive shuffle before or leading into the election. And I think there was a sense that ministers that were in certain portfolios, like Mary Lee Fullerton in long-term care, there needed to be a bit of a shakeup there.
Scott?
So I start in rabid agreement with you both. A cabinet shuffle that doesn't touch the premier, finance minister, health minister, education minister, treasury board, attorney general. Like, that's a definite in a provincial government to boot. It has zero public impact.
Treasury board was affected. Prab Sakaria became treasury
board.
Oh,
I'm sorry. All right. You know what? Well, then I retract it all. Obviously, this was an earthquake of an event then. Look, it just doesn't fucking matter. It just doesn't matter in public terms. And so obviously they had other items on their agenda. In addition to that, I really do think from a policy perspective, you have to look at it from a political perspective. You have to look at it and say, so Mary Lee Fullerton gets, I think, arguably a promotion in terms of the bat she swings around the cabinet table. Maybe not in terms of profile, maybe not in terms of salience of the issue right now. But good grief, I mean, she commands an enormous amount of provincial budget all of a sudden. And so she gets rewarded for that. Rod Phillips is back there. Rod Phillips, who's not exactly, an anti-corporate revolutionary. He's going to now be the guy who's going to go nose to nose and tell Mike Harris that for-profit care is going to take a beating. I don't think so. So it's sort of an FU to all of that. But, most fundamentally, I guess I just think it must be an intramural exercise. I struggle to see what the intramural thing is. I wonder, I have a question, and it's for you, Jenny. You would know better than the rest of us. But in the sense that a lot of it was getting rid of older not older, but longer-term members, longer sitting members who were from largely rural areas. They were vestiges of their times in opposition. And I wonder if it was that, it's not quite a generational change, but it's sort of like, that small clutch of rural members that dominated during opposition, it's the complete curtain fall on them. Like the Uriks and the Akabuskis, like Hardemans, it's like, sorry guys, right? Your day is over. We want to be a suburban party. Goodness knows that we'll be able to compete for that in the next election, but that's our ambition. And therefore, there's just no room for you at the table. We're going to assume that those ridings are safe. We don't need you as a cabinet minister to be there. But like, if that's not to me, that's not that big an objective. I mean, maybe it's kind of brush clearing.
Well, I'll start by saying I had more activity and more people messaged me yesterday, being the second year anniversary that the Premier's first chief of staff, Dean French, was fired. Then I got.
Do you know him? Did you work with Dean? You guys used to share cabs and drink out of the same coffee cup. You're a palsy-walsy, right? Is that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay.
And so I think, Scott, to your point, I think that will be the kind of what is the demotion of MPPs that have been have kind of slugged it away in opposition and mostly rural. I know that some of the media reported that it was rumored that these are the ministers that spoke most strongly in cabinet regarding lockdown measures, not supporting lockdown measures or wanting it to be regionally, because their ridings, of course, were much less affected by COVID than what suburban and urban ridings are. I'm not sure if that's fully the case, but I think it goes back to, I think there is a sense among some in the Ford government that appointing people in marginal seats to cabinet will help their chances in the next election, which, as I said, I've never seen happen. Just practically, people don't care. And also, if you want to actually practically look at it, like if I was looking at it as a campaign manager, it means that those people have much more responsibility now in terms of government responsibility, and won't be able to do as much of the constituency work, door knock on the weekends, attend events, what have you. So I think that that's kind of what the government was thinking when they did it. In terms of Rod, there have been rumors circulating for months that he was going to be back. The premier felt that he had served his time in the penalty box. And to be fair to Rod, it was never an issue of competency in terms of when he was removed in January after the St. Bart's vacation. I do think it's interesting that he went into long-term care. And I'm not sure whether, and this could be reading too much into it, but I had a couple people say to me, this might be that even though Christine Elliott has signaled that she's running again, there's a sense that she may not. And there could be a possibility that Rod in long-term care means that if Christine decides not to run, that long-term care as an associate minister under health, that he could step in sometime in the next year and take over that. I'm not sure how much truth is involved in that, but that was some of the speculation out of Queen's Park this week.
It's interesting because, I mean, putting him in that job is a statement of some kind. I just don't know what statement it is, but it's a very deliberate move.
Well, it could be for any host of reasons. As I said, Rod's competency was never the issue. I think, though, that it's and I'm surprised there wasn't the when he was reappointed to cabinet. The first thing that came to mind is, when we're watching the hockey game on Sportsnet, there's still a ton of ads the Ontario government's running in terms of keeping the border closed. And so it was interesting that you're still running the ads about non-essential travel not being allowed back into the country, and you put a minister back who had an international story on travel. But I think that's more of an indictment on Andrew Horwath and Stephen Del Duca than it probably is on anything in the Ford government.
Can I throw out one additional thought, maybe a thesis, and then Jenny, you can tell me why it's wrong. First of all, on the long-term care thing and Rod Phillips, I mean, is it
a full-on thesis?
It's a full-on thesis. So if you don't mind,
out thesis,
maybe grab a vegan shake and sit back. I'm gonna really footnote this to death. First on I know what the fucking statement is about putting him into long-term care. And the statement is, don't worry, nothing's going to happen to private care providers. The Chartwells of the world can rest easy at night. There's going to be absolutely no repercussions from this government. So that seems almost indisputable. But here's flipping sides, though, and picking up on the point about Rod's competency. I think if you look at the life of this government, and I don't know if this is a cause and effect thing, maybe it's a coincidence thing, but when Rod has been around playing a prominent role in this government has been better. When Rod has not been around playing a competent role, central role in this government has been worse. And it kind of corresponds to our Dean French anniversary, because obviously he was just a complete clusterfuck of chief of staff in terms of setting the agenda and managing the affairs of government. But he moves out, Rod takes into finance, suddenly that government stabilizes. Even in the early days of the pandemic, the government looked better. He's gone at Christmas after the atrocious judgment call, and things have been worse since. Again, there may be no cause and effect. That may not be a causal thing. But it seems to me that when he's played a central role in this government, that government's been better.
That's fair.
Scott Reed, the world needs more Rod Phillips.
Well, this is what I'm driving at. And I don't think he should be the long-term care minister. I think he should be the minister of everything. I think that he should get all the jobs. But I just don't know how can you go from that Christmas thing, sitting in the armchair and going, well, it's awfully cozy here, and then run with a straight face for the leadership of the party if that's ever a prospect. I just think that he can get back into cabinet. I'm not sure he can get back into a place where people say, yeah, I'm there for that.
Well, and his riding is not like, 2018 was a bit of an anomaly in terms of ridings that the Conservatives picked up. And Ajax is actually one of the probably the weakest Conservative riding in the Durham region. Definitely one of the kind of weaker, less strength of the Conservative vote in the eastern part of the 905. And so even at the current poll levels, where depending on where the Ontario PC party is, Rod is going to have to work hard for his re-election.
Having said that, if I was running Ford, I wouldn't feel bad about my position right now.
No.
Presumably have bottomed out, presumably have gone through the worst of things. The base held up pretty well. The core vote held up pretty well. Never dropped below 30%, hung in the mid-30s, always was in the lead, and is getting an almost perfect split between the Liberals and the NDP in almost every poll, which I guess takes us to the NDP ad this week, which is the first salvo in the primary to see who gets to challenge the Ford government, I guess. But just take a step back. Do you think I'm nuts, Jenny? I think they're not in bad shape to get reelected.
No, I think they're, listen, I think they're fine. I think the biggest hit that Conservative leaders have taken during COVID over the last kind of 14, 15 months is actually with Conservative voters. And in terms of, small business owners, it's not just Doug, you've seen it with Jason Kenney as well. But I think people are starting to feel a little bit better about COVID. I think that, we were behind in terms of vaccine distribution, but Canada's catching up now. It's the summer, so people are outside more. And so I think that that's going to, I think that is why you're seeing kind of the poll numbers for Jason go up. You're seeing the poll numbers for Doug kind of, I agree with you, kind of bottomed out just because people's mindset is different. So, but I think that for Doug, for example, and we've talked about this before, and we probably will get into this as well. A lot is contingent because people are happy with a lot of the federal government supports out there right now. Like it has backstops the economic ramifications of COVID, and so if we have an election sooner rather than later federally, and if there's a change in terms of what the federal government supports are for small business and for Canadians, will that have an adverse effect if people start to feel the pinch economically leading into next year?
Jenny, do you like the NDP ad?
I thought it was actually pretty good. The one with Del Duca where they have his face move weird. Yeah. I thought it was actually a really it was a really clever ad, and I think it's smart. They are for the most part fighting each other. At least the NDP, except for a few ridings, the NDP are fighting the Liberals. Liberals have kind of a two-way fight. They're fighting the Dippers depending on where they are and us. So I think it's smart because a lot of times you see the NDP, they just can't help themselves. They want to go after Conservatives, and it actually isn't outside of like in Ontario, Windsor, Thunder Bay. It's other parts of Northern Ontario. They're not their opponents are not the Conservatives. They've got to figure out ways to keep the core Liberal vote that went NDP last time, like in Toronto Centre, Spadina, Fort York, University of Rosedale.
Center-left Liberal voters do not like it when the Liberal Party attacks the NDP instead of the Conservatives. Do NDP voters not give a crap about that?
So I don't know the answer to that question, but that's the question that was on my mind. I remember the grief that we've encountered, David, when we would go after New Democrats, provincially and federally, with paid media, and we would get it and hear it hard from caucus and from activists in the party on that side, saying this makes it harder for us to consolidate and to woo those people. We just can't. We can't get that job done. So I wonder if that would be just as pronounced. Now, the hardcore sign captain NDP types loathe the Liberals, like hate us with a burning passion of 1,000 suns, right? But I wonder if that, that downtown urban vote that could find itself on any given morning in Toronto voting NDP or Liberal, I wonder if they're like, yeah, I don't understand why you're doing this. So I thought the ad was okay. My guess is that its weight is so insignificant that it's not going to really affect much in terms of hitting people. So that's one failing. But I I don't know the answer to the question, but that's the same question I had, which is, will it prove ineffective because the NDP Liberal switcher base isn't looking for a civil war? They want to make certain that all guns are trained on Ford. And will they find that alienating?
I think I would blow off all of the internal crap that you would get about that. I think I would blow off the caucus, everything, in order to run the kind of ads the NDP are running, or if I was a Liberal, to do the reverse. Because there is no question that the non-Ford voter is going to be highly motivated to remove Ford. And so there's a huge first mover advantage to whoever is seen as the strongest alternative to defeat the Ford government on the center left or left. And if nobody establishes any distance between themselves and the other between now and the election, then it will happen serendipitously, and it won't be under your control as a campaign. It will happen because of an event, or voters will just decide one day based on the debate, as they did after the City TV debate last time. And so if I was running a campaign and trying to control that dynamic, I would be trying to force gap between myself and the Liberals, or if I was running the Liberal campaign and the NDP before the campaign started, so that default positioning was established at the beginning.
What's the best way of doing that?
I agree, and this is depending on what their weight is. They may not be coming up in our social media feeds because they're not targeting. I doubt anyone in the NDP universe would be targeting me in any form of social media or online presence with an anti-liberal ad. That would probably not. So we're not even sure what the weight is. This is also the first time that people are seeing of any attack on Stephen Del Duca. He's lucked out by being kind of very well unknown. He's the only leader whose approval ratings have kind of gone up, and that's simply because people don't know him. So this is an introduction. And as for ads, like Scott, I'm sure David has felt this too. I remember going into caucus meetings when I was national campaign director and playing ads that we were about to, okay, guys, here's the next TV ad we're doing. Here's our next radio ad. And you'd have someone stand at the mic going, I don't like it. People in my riding just don't like negative ads. We can't run this. This is terrible. And I'd stand there and I'd be like, nope, they actually work. And, half the caucus would be booing the ads. But they work.
Such a great vibe, eh? I love that. What a great...
That's why I can never wait for
the economy. David fucking Hurley. Why aren't we talking about the economy? Paul Martin's greatest finance minister in history. You should be talking about the economy. You sons of bitches don't know what you're doing. All right, okay, fine.
Heard it so many. That's why I can never wait for the writ to start, so you don't have to consult them anymore. You just do it on your own.
There's a difference between consulting and informing them about what's happening.
Yeah. What?
Well, I was.
You said
Well, my is. I see the virtue of defining Del Duca negatively because there's no definition around him, and I think that you can make of him almost anything right now. And the Liberals may not feel they have the resources to do that. So I see that. I see the benefit of that. But again, when it comes to consolidating that vote and creating that gap that you're talking about, I just wonder, like, what's the most effective way to do that? And, I got nothing against negative ads, but I just don't know. Like, I would wonder if the more negative ad that I would want to go after is what issues you can't trust them on, right? And the issues that are in play and of anxious concern to voters now, and say, because the Liberals did this just not so long ago, you can't trust them on that. We're the only ones that, on education you can trust or something like that. I don't know. So I think there may be softer spots in the Liberal belly is what I'm wondering.
And they are not negative ads. They are factual ads.
Yes, factual. Yes.
Negatively factual.
Right. And my facts begin with terrible things about you.
You think
negatively, well, they're not factual. They're negatively fact-based.
They're factually negative.
Core of fact somewhere buried in the ad. Anyway, that's.
But doesn't this come down to sooner or later, if the NDP are going to pull ahead of the Liberals can pull ahead on brand. I'm not so sure the NDP can. And if the NDP are going to pull ahead against the Liberals in this three-way fight, they're going to have to do it the obvious way, the old-fashioned way, and that is Horwath is going to have to pull the sled. And that's what happened in the last election. She went into the city debate. It was the first time anybody paid attention to her. She seemed appealing, and suddenly that was it. Last candle snuffed out for the Liberals. But she's a dreadful politician and a dreadful opposition leader, and she has spent years and years and years, and but for that one day has not left her mark. And I just think, they can define Del Duca, but ultimately, where's that gap going to come from? Horwath has to be better than Del Duca in order to win. It's just that simple. And she's never shown, but for that one day, that she can be good.
Well, I know this. I know that vote is not going to split evenly by the election day. The anti-Ford vote will not split evenly by election day. So that's what I know for sure. Federally, Jesus. There was a Nanos poll circulating around Twitter yesterday that showed the Liberals at 50% in Ontario, Conservatives at 27%, NDP at 14%. Is there a mercy rule in Canadian politics that can be invoked at this point?
Well, this is the reason. If I was the Liberal campaign manager, I would be bugging everyone to go. I'd be like John Cusack and say anything and walk around with a giant boombox from
Kickboxing sport of the future.
Like with calling an election, like I'd walk up and down the halls. I'd go in front of Trudeau's cottage, hold it up. Like if I was the Liberal campaign manager, this is what I want to go. 50% numbers are close to what Chrétien got in 2000. The combined vote between the Alliance and Tories that were, I think, in Ontario were close to 26 or 36, I think, and that came in with 2 seats. I think with redistribution and one party and what have you, that could be less than 10 seats for Ontario in the for the Tories in the province of Ontario. So these numbers are very Nanos is higher, but if you look at any of the public polling out, it's consistently, I think 44-45% in Ontario is the lowest that we're seeing the Liberals with, and that's their majority is paved in Quebec and Ontario. They could easily have the election won by the time they hit the Manitoba border.
So what the hell do the Conservatives do in Ontario? I mean, this has been the question. We debated it, frankly, all through the last campaign. We had this discussion every day of the writ period, every week of the writ period in the last campaign, and it remains the fundamental question. Conservatives can't form a government without winning Ontario, not just being close, but winning Ontario. They have not been within single digits in any poll I've seen, I don't think, since the 2019 election. So, how do they win Ontario? What do they got to do?
Well, they have to have a value proposition. There is a reason why political parties, it's how you make the sausage. Like political parties, you guys have done it. I know I've done it. You have a narrative. You have to figure out who you're appealing to, and of course, we're talking about suburban Ontario, parts in the 519, the 905, obviously the 613. And I think consistently we saw it a little bit more with Andrew, less so with Aaron, is they don't really know what they're standing for. They don't really know what they're running. It's a hodgepodge of issues. And I know I've said this before, like leading into the 2011 campaign, every statement SO31 we had was talking about Michael Ignatioff's risky coalition with the separatist Bloc Québécois that would that would institute a carbon tax and raise the price on gas, groceries, and anything that Canadians need to buy, and the media rolled their eyes on it, and that was what the first week and a half of that campaign was on. And we've seen over the last six months is that it seems the party, the Conservative Party, is chasing every shiny bauble known. Like if you go hunting mini rabbits, you're only going to act like you're not going to get any. And so I think that they haven't been able to ascertain what the narrative, what the qualitative and quantitative questions are that they need to contrast themselves with, especially the Liberals. And it's getting pretty, and they're almost running out of time if they're not already out of time. I think that the latest the Liberals will call the election will be the first week or two of August, but I can tell you it must be awful tempting for them to be wanting to basically walk out today and say, we're in this, guys.
So let's start
Scott,
there.
do you know why the Liberals are so far ahead in Ontario? Do you understand why they're leading so strongly in Ontario?
I think it is the accumulation of 15 months of the federal Liberals and Trudeau specifically signaling, independent of execution, independent of how policies unfold and all that, signaling that in broad strokes, his priorities are right and his story is coherent. We're going to do what it takes. We're going to keep you whole. We're going to work to recover. Public health and then strong economy. Those are our priorities. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to keep you whole, folks. And I think that there's all sorts to criticize in terms of, originally the vaccine rollout and all that kind of stuff, all sorts to criticize. Frankly, you can go back and look at how some of the programs that were rolled out have done. If you want to put on a green visor and, start going through, well, how much money went to whom and all that stuff. I mean, there's vast sums of money that have moved out of the door with virtually no accountability. God knows there has to be some horror stories in there. It just stands to reason there would be. I just don't know that that's going to actually track with people. I think fundamentally Ontario in particular feels comfortable with the value proposition, with the coherent story from Trudeau. So I think that makes it tough. And, but I want to take a step back. First, I've been the guy saying you guys are talking like there should have been an election earlier in the spring. I never thought they were going to go for that. I've always thought they were going to go for an election in August. I now am revising that. I think if these numbers are replicated, I just don't think I'm falling in line with you guys. I just do not think it's possible that you even wait to the beginning of August. What's the purpose? You have to cast your mind forward. If you're thinking, well, I want to capture a sense of enthusiasm and things are starting to really roll, and if you assume that moment doesn't last forever as things rebound and open up, I think you call that election in mid-July and for early September, and suddenly that might hit the sweet spot. And I don't know what the difference is between calling it in July versus calling it in August, really, in terms of downside. Like, I think that might get you a good dead month where that broad storyline just stays in place and people don't really have the luxury of paying attention. So my feeling is that most of the speculation that we've seen around when the election call will come is going to end up being shy. I think they're going to go in the next 2-3 weeks. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say though, Scott, if they do that, it won't be September. Like, there's no way they're going to increase. The minimum election day is 36. The minimum election period is 36
end of August, then, yeah, sure.
There is no way I would be, and I don't know what you think, David, there is no way I'd be recommending that they go even 42 weeks or what have you.
No.
Make this as short as possible.
Make it as short as possible.
Not 1 hour longer than it has to be.
So I'm assuming just mid-July it takes you to the last week of August, first week or two of September, somewhere in that zone. That's all I'm thinking. But I think an election call in July just feels to me like, unless those numbers are a mirage. But if you're at 103% in Ontario, I mean, I think you just go, time to go to the bank and cash this fucking check, man. Come on. So that's thing number one. Thing number two, in terms of the Conservatives, to your question, David, I think the only play is around an issue where there is no coherence and an election, and you may not get punished for that. You can invent coherence and hope that when people are paying an elevated level of attention, maybe that will reward you. So I think they have to have a kind of a Reagan lunch bucket economic prescription. That's where I think the Conservatives would go. Not deficit hawks. Stick with the plan. Over the course of 10 years, we'll get that deficit down, but that's not our priority. So kill all of those incoherent, sometimes contradictory signals about being fiscal hawks and just say, look, we are going to bring back jobs. We're going to do a better job of managing the recovery and the rebound than Trudeau will. And, look to his own riding if you're O'Toole, right? Look to suburban, working class Ontario, where he comes from, and make that your prescription. Make that voter your desired targeted voter and talk to them nonstop all the time. And it's not a bunch of, take the base for granted. Don't get into a bunch of social issues. keep all that stuff in a bottle, put a plug in it, but just talk, lunch bucket, economic issues. Don't get caught up in fiscal hawkism, and see if you can make a play on that. Well, one thing that for sure isn't going to work is this implicit notion that some conservatives want to tell themselves, which is people are finally tired of Trudeau. They've finally seen who Trudeau is. People have had a good long look at Trudeau, and they're still entirely comfortable with him. So just forget this idea. If blackface didn't kill the guy, I'm telling you, sitting around saying, well, vaccine rollout in January was inadequate, that ain't going to kill him. Okay, it isn't going to be that people are sick and tired of Trudeau. That's not going to fell this guy.
Agreed. He remains the single best asset the Liberal Party of Canada has. If I was in their caucus and he still didn't know my name, I'd still be happy with him being leader, because it's a better chance for me to win my seat. But I think in terms of a lunch bucket type issue, it's turning kind of the talk of interest rates into lunch bucket issues, and Pierre Poilievre has been pounding on this for a while, and I know you're talking. I know, Scott, you were, I think, intimating that he was a fiscal hawk, but the increase in interest rates is actually starting to hit people. There's been a huge amount of costs that have gone up since between last year and this year, over 3% in different circuits.
Inflation, you mean? Interest rates haven't gone up.
Yeah, inflation, sorry, which will eventually.
I just want to make sure.
I apologize, sorry. But gas has gone up 43%, vehicles 5%, furniture 10%, housing supplies. If anyone's doing renovations, if they waited to do renovations now, in terms of materials from last year to now, has increased significantly, and it's become extremely impossible for anyone to buy a house. Stats Canada will say that the Consumer Price Index will say that housing prices costs have gone up minusculely, but that's month-to-month payments. That isn't the fact that if you went to buy a house March of 2020 versus March of 2021, there's been a 30% increase in most homes. Condo markets in places like Toronto are exceptions, but if you're looking to buy a home, they have gone up, and so it's become less affordable for people, for the middle class, so to speak, to be able to buy a house and to be able to pay their bills. And I think that there's got to be a way that the Conservative Party can translate. Those are the issues. Those are the people they need to be reaching out to.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I mean, I don't know. I don't know whether the interest rate inflation story has enough time to gel. But what I do think is that all of the things you said, Jenny, are true in terms of what people have experienced in terms of inflation in core necessities, food, housing, gasoline, transportation, etc. It's been offset by some other things, but I don't know that people calculate that. They've seen inflation in areas that matter to them. And every party agreed the last election was about cost of living. And cost of living was a huge issue in 2015. And it's been a building issue all through the 2000s as middle class, working class voters feel like they're losing ground. I doubt that's changed. So I suspect that there is some potential in working at are the Liberals cavalier about what's happening to your cost of living and the affordability of your life. So I think that's one issue where the Conservatives have some traction. I'm not sure it's an inflation story or an interest rate story. It may just be a cost of living story.
Well, I think they are cognizant of it, and I think that's why they're going to want to go as soon as possible. Like between March and April of this year, inflation rose by 0.6%, which doesn't seem like a lot. But if that happens every month, you're looking at, in 1 year, a 7.2% increase or somewhere around there in terms of inflation. And so I think they're completely aware of this. I think they're looking at the same numbers. I still think the Conservatives should go on it, but I think that if I'm the Liberals, before this becomes top of mind or before this is really actually affecting Canadians at a broader area than it's broader range than what it's happening now, that's part of the reason why they want to have an election. I think they're fully cognizant of what is coming down the pipe.
So I agree with all this. I agree with all this strenuously, and it is exactly where I was going in terms of lunch bucket economic type issues, and just And I think you've got to try to recreate Churchill in 1945, right? And everybody talks about that, but what does that really look like in this dynamic? And I think it's a conservative Aaron O'Toole leader acknowledging, look, we needed big brontosaurus-sized government to pour money all over everything during the pandemic. That was the right answer. That might not be a comfortable place for conservatives, but that was the right answer. And that's no longer the right answer to every problem that's going to ail us as we go forward and we try to build a sustainable, strong recovery. And, everything is getting more expensive. Now, that may not be true, and that may not, and there may be lots of arguments against that. But, I would be hammering on everything is getting more expensive. It's going to keep getting more expensive. And if your only answer to that is to pour money out of the government boot on top of it, we're going to end up in a bigger problem. So we got to get a different balance now that we're out of that pandemic. And I think, you're working jobs, you're working sort of, just kitchen table issues, that starts to give you something to work with. And then the pièce de résistance is that the Liberals, because they've been in government, and we've all been in government, and we know how it infects and warps your brain, and how everybody says, well, we must be responsible. There's a very high likelihood that the Liberals will be tempted to debate the economic policy merits of that, and they will correct them that the Bank of Canada has said that they're going to maintain a low core interest rate policy for a long time. And there's a big difference between core inflation versus overall inflation, and that the Conservatives are deliberately misconstruing and all of that would play completely into the hand.
They will argue with Canadians about whether inflation exists, right?
That's right.
They will argue with Canadians about whether inflation exists.
You can't put gas prices in there. That's not part of core inflation. Sit down and shut up, lady in the town hall. Like, that's the kind of mentality that happens, and it does.
It's all supply chain problems. It will work itself out. Yeah,
exactly. This fucking ship in the Panama Canal, that's the problem, okay? We're going to fix it now.
But do you think Trudeau actually would go down that road? He's a very different...
I don't, but it's the trap.
He's different than Harper. He's different than Paul. My guess is probably Paul will be the same as Harper, want to stand up and actually talk about, get into a debates like on economic, on all of supply chains and all of that kind of stuff. I don't think Trudeau is there. I think he's ruthlessly political. We've seen him mature, I think, especially in the last year. The pandemic has turned him less goofy, so to speak, and they've even been able to read the mood better than most provincial politicians. It was he
less goofy since March 2020, coming at you for re-election.
No, but he and Doug were the same kind of politician last year at this time.
Now 20% less goofy.
He was.
I love it. It's a slogan for the times.
He's read the mood quicker than the provinces had. It was Trudeau that first, he stopped question period at his cottage. He, put a tie on. He's doing, question period in the House. He's doing press conferences in the National Press Theatre. He's kind of been able to read the mood a little bit better than some provincial politicians. And I think that also importantly is I don't think the Liberal campaign is going to make what I think was a major strategic mistake in the last election, and that goes back to our talk about factual negative ads, is they did none of that during the election. They would spin stuff out. We know about pushing out, obviously, Andrew's speech on same-sex marriage leading into the campaign, which was destabilizing for weeks for the Conservatives. But I don't think the Liberals are going to make the same mistake with Aaron, because I think if they had run a proper non-Sunny Ways campaign, they could have been much closer to the majority, if not gotten it. And I think that if you're sitting in the Liberal war room now, you're like, all right, buddy, we're not going to pretend to be Sunny Ways. We're not going to say we're not going negative. We're going to get our fucking majority this time.
Yep. I agree with all that.
Oh yeah, Scheer got away easy for sure.
Yeah, I agree with all that. They're going to be.
Hey, let's spare a minute here for Anime Paul, who took an extremely bad hand of cards last week and played it badly. Well, Scott, let's start with you. What do you think about what happened last week, and is anything salvageable at this point?
So I want to make a broad point. I'm not going to dissect her performance, which I thought was atrocious in that news conference. I thought it was atrocious in a moment of crisis to meet it in that way. She said lots of things that may be true. She didn't say lots of things that were relevant to helping herself. And that's got to be the project when you're when your back's against the wall. So I thought it was, I thought I had some sympathy for her because I thought that the ultimatum from her own executive council seemed an outrageous thing to do. But I saw evidence in that news conference of the person I thought I heard executive members complaining about, and political instincts that seemed to me to be very, very fallible. So set all that aside, though, I thought it was a reminder fundamentally that building a party is really hard. It ought to be really hard. Like, in Canada, building a brokerage party that attracts people and you maintain your base and grow and get a new coalition together and welcome new voters, that is hard freaking work. And it takes a unique political leader that can balance the paradoxical imperatives to, one, widen and invite others, B, exercise the discipline and control necessary to keep that ship tight and working. She should have short sheeted her own advisor at the beginning of that process when he made that statement that appeared to attack their own caucus members. She shouldn't have permitted that to go. And so you needed that discipline and control. On the other hand, you've got to be inviting and welcoming and exciting people. So this is really, really hard. And I think we're finding that Annamie Paul, who has a lot of talent and a lot of appeal, is failing at it. And it reminds you of how hard it is. And it makes me think, and I'm not blowing smoke, Jenny, but I think about Preston Manning, and he got that thing moving, but he could only take it so far, right? And then, if you want to be honest, you think about remarkable political leaders, I got to hand it to Stephen Harper. He takes something that looks like it could be fizzling out with the Reform Party. He manages to knit that marriage with the old Conservative Party, creates a new party, which essentially is his party. And
you've forgotten about the important Stockwell Day Bridge. You've forgotten about the important bridge between Manning and her.
That's what I mean with it. Looked like the vehicle could be running out of gas, right? I mean, it's a remarkable set of skills where he was able to grow and grow and grow that new party's base and support while being so disciplined. And guys like me used to knock on him always. He's Mr. Control, and he's straitjacketing everybody. Well, you had to straitjacket everybody. So we just look back to the political alchemy involved in what he pulled off there in those years. It's a remarkable thing, and we're witnessing someone else fail at it. Now, she's got greater disadvantages, smaller party, but it's really hard work, and that's why it's hard work.
But that's not Annamie Paul's fault. If we're talking about who hasn't grown the Green Party, that would have been Elizabeth May. It's not like Annamie Paul started the Green Party. It's been decades. It's Elizabeth May that has moved it at a turtle's pace of no seats to 1 seat to 3 seats. But
she wasn't Harper. Annamie Paul wasn't Harper. Harper would not have permitted this crisis to occur and unfold and eat him up.
You're talking about creating a party, and I'm saying that's not Annamie Paul's fault. That's Elizabeth May's fault. Because if you look at leaders that have been successful, we've talked about Harper, we've talked about Preston Manning, Lucien Bouchard did the same thing. We're talking about people that started political parties, and within 5 years, both Bouchard and Manning were leaders of the opposition. This is more of a Elizabeth. I was more sympathetic to Annamie Paul last week because I believe that she was never given a full shake by the Green Party. This is party still of Elizabeth May. Elizabeth May felt, she didn't want to step down, and she's trying to cause as much problems. I agree with you, Scott, 100% in terms of her performance last week, in terms of a combination of just a giant chip on her shoulder to the stunning lack of political naivety that is just stunning to me. And so it'll be interesting to see when the writs dropped, is she going to be the leader? Because there's apparently some vote, or there at least talk of some vote out of that meeting that she had with her executive council, or whatever they call it, for July 20th. And so if she's somehow turfed as a leader, does this mean that we go into the next election campaign with Elizabeth May as a leader yet again for the Green Party, because there's only kind of two people standing?
Scott, you make what Stephen Harper did seem so difficult that you'd think that smart opponents should have been able to stop it.
Well, yeah, but he was also very lucky in the opponents that he had, David. Right? When you take a look at you and me, No, you know what? In our defense, I would say this of all three of us for a second, right? Maybe, just maybe, right? A cynical, grizzled, you got to play within the boundaries of the status quo sometimes. Maybe we know a fucking thing or two, right? And when people sweep onto the stage and say, I'm going to do politics differently and it's going to be perfect. And when I encounter these things, we're showing the limits of that. We've been showing the limits of that in the last 2-3 weeks. And I think Annamie Paul was dealt a really viciously bad hand of cards, but I agree with David that she's also played them poorly and a little more realpolitik earlier on and said, where does my self-interest really lie? What do I have to do? And, the negligence toward caucus and the willingness to say, well, I'm just going to stand by my advisor. That stuff, those were scoring on your own net. And you just didn't need to do that.
Well, and I'll be honest, we spend so much bandwidth, and I just don't mean us. I mean the entire press gallery and people spend so much bandwidth talking about the Greens, and they're seriously irrelevant. Most of the polls have Max's party, the People's Party, polling higher than the Green Party, and in a lot of regions polling higher. And so I just think that, like, for whatever reason, the Green Party has been on this cusp of breakthroughs now for 4 elections in a row, and it's just not going to happen. I think that it's completely they've become completely irrelevant, and that's not just Annamie Paul. That is the fault of Elizabeth May, who turned the party, instead of trying to build a big tent coalition, she wanted to keep it about her and her power base and her friends and her family within the party. And I think that we will see them less relevant, which is hard to get. Less relevant after the next election than what they are now.
Ooh, that hurt. All right, but fair. So, who wants to start with a hey you?
Well,
who wants to lead us out of here with a hey you? Go ahead.
I'll start. So my hey you is to the Liberals, and it was announced this week to the Liberal Party federally. It was announced this week that the border measures are being extended. The current border measures are being extended to July 21st, and so there seems to still be no coherent border policy, and there is more and more pressure from the U.S. and there's more and more pressure from especially communities on border communities that have been solely affected by the close of the border. And I think there's been a stunning lack of understanding as to what these rules are, because the border is completely closed for Americans to come to Canada in any way, flight, by land. The same is not being held is not for Canadians. So Canadians can't cross the land border to the U.S., but they can fly there, as I know very well. So I think it was a good start that the Liberals have announced that those Canadians that are fully vaccinated do not have to quarantine or go through the 14 days because they are fully vaccinated. But I think there has to be more of a signaling as to what coherent policies that we are going to have in terms of opening up the border, because it is affecting the economy in a very negative way. There's going to be entire sectors in the country that may not recover if the full closure goes on much longer. So
the announcement yesterday seemed a bit half-baked, didn't it?
Completely.
Well, it seems to go without saying, like, this is the purpose of getting vaccines. Like, vaccines are, people are lining up with in record numbers to do this, because politicians, health officials have said that once we get vaccines, we can go back to normal. And governments have to actually start making decisions that that's the case. And they are in the US. You've seen even, it's not just Florida. There were images out of concerts at Madison Square Gardens last week, a full capacity. And so I think that Trudeau has to, I know he's been loath to involve himself on this stuff. He would prefer to have the provinces do it, but the border is his bailiwick, and this government needs to make the decisions on stuff.
Yeah. I've got family that are in the United States who are Canadian citizens. They have children under the age of 12. Those children are not permitted to have vaccines. They can come back here and not have to quarantine, but the children will have to quarantine. So what sense does that make? They're all in the same household, so the adults can leave that house and wander around and contact other people, but the children cannot. So obviously, therefore, you can't quarantine small children like that. So they can't come. So it's super disappointing and not coherent. You can't go, all right, whether I like it or not, the medical guidance is this, and now I can draw a straight line to the policy. It's just frustrating as shit.
All right, you got a hey you, brother?
I sure do. My hey you, I told you I was going to bring this up later. My hey you is to Chris Lee, NHL referee, or so he claims. Now, I know nobody likes a sore loser, but you know what? I have always, if nothing else in my life, been a fucking sore loser, and I am mad at Chris Lee. So my simple appeal is this. Okay? Do something else with your life. Okay? Travel. Take a course. Cash in your RSPs. I don't care, but please stop being an NHL official. Mercifully, we're out of your reach and your whistle for a while, your lack of whistle. Mercifully, Corey Perry may be able to skate around without fears that an RPG will rip his face from his head and encounter no penalty. But still, please, after that display, just go away. I beg you, just go away. Whatever you do, stay away from the Montreal Canadiens. Goodbye. Go away, Chris Lee.
I think he's got a great career ahead of him refereeing professional wrestling.
Stelco Men's League. God love you, Kevin Biasco.
Yeah, I know, it's a great line. It's a great line. My hey you goes out to Anime Paul directly, personally. Here is free advice, worth all of it, what you need to do. First of all, your mistake, the thing you did wrong was not to discipline, fire, and distance yourself from the advisor that called for caucus to be defeated. That's not on for a staffer, not to call for any caucus member to be defeated, much less your entire caucus to be defeated. So that was obvious that person had to go and you had to stand with your caucus. So remedy that. Second thing is, make Paul Manley your best friend. Develop cohesiveness between him and yourself so that you've got a strong, cohesive unit there going into the election. The third thing is the Green Party apparatus clearly doesn't want to support you, and they've been trying to undercut you at every level. Negotiate what their commitment to the campaign is going to be financially, and get that money independently controlled by your people who are running the campaign so that the party apparatus can't kneecap you or handicap you throughout the writ. Get control of your money. And the third thing is save all your money, because nothing you do between now and the debate will matter. You're going to have a chance at the debate to stand up and have a moment and take on Trudeau and take on everybody else. And if you have a moment, then run your advertising. So get an ad ready, save it for after the writ, and get your act together, and save it for after the debate, get your act together, and gear everything toward what kind of run you can get on after the debate. But the first thing is mend your fence with your caucus member, and secondly, wrest control of the part of the campaign financing away from the national council of your party. What do you think? Good advice?
Advice from an apostle of the status quo.
All right. Thank you both for another great conversation. Go Habs, go tonight. Thank you very much. I would like to thank all of our listeners and viewers. I would obviously like to thank TELUS and CN. I'd like to thank Metal and Andy and the Air Quotes Media team. And I'd also like to thank Cole Caulfield for obvious reasons. And we'll see you next week.
No.
Burly, burly,